Welcome to the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley, psychology student and international best-selling psychology author of over 30 psychology books, bringing you the latest psychology news, fascinating psychology topics and more each week. If you want to learn more, then please check out connorwhiteley.net/books. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the YouTube video or follow on your favourite podcast app. And here's the show. Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 333 of the Psychology World podcast with me, Con Whiteley. And today's episode is on what happens during a counselling assessment. And it is Saturday, the 28th of June 2025 as I record this. So today's podcast episode is really insightful, it's fascinating, and for me it was a lot of fun because this is a chapter taken from my brand new book, Clinical Psychology Reflections, Volume 6. So the book was a bit delayed at coming out, but now that it is out, it's certainly thoughtful, impactful, and really insightful reflections that really get you thinking about clinical psychology. And this is one of them, because when I had my rape counselling in late 2024, back in mid 2024, I needed to undergo a counselling assessment. And I've had one of these before, but this one was really impactful because it was so brilliant, it was so well done, and it really did put me at ease. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. Like, what actually happens, just so you can be aware yourself, but also what, in my opinion, makes a good one. And this has a lot of clinical psychology implications, especially if you're an aspiring or qualified psychologist, because we're all going to have to do psychological assessments. In fact, psychological assessments were actually one of my favourite lectures and one of my favourite role plays at university. It was brilliant fun. I really enjoyed this chapter, so I know you're going to love it too. So you got that to look forward to in the content part of today's episode. So moving on to the psychology news section, I'm going to be reading from the British Psychological Society Research Digest. And the first one is very interesting because of something that my university does. Hello again, letters aid reconnection after brain injury. Acquired brain injury refers to any kind of brain injury that occurs post-birth, normally sustained through accidents or illnesses. The impact can be significant, along with the physical changes that happen post a brain injury. Many egg experience differences in their emotional life, with some having different feelings towards or relationships with loved ones after their injury. For those living with people with acquired brain injuries, this can be a challenge, sometimes referred to as an ambiguous grief. Family members and friends often experience what University of Plymouth's Elizabeth Gilmore and Alice Norman refer to as, open quote, the loss of a person who is still physically present, close quote. In the Family Journal, the pair report the results of a pilot writing in intervention designed to help family members of those with acquired brain injuries understand and manage their grief. Okay, so this is brilliant for a few reasons that I want to talk about. So first of all, at my university, they recently opened a brain injury clinic, which in all fairness is something that I've actually got to try and talk to a friend of mine about, because it'd be good if I could at least do some observations and like observe a psychological assessment or something like that. Because it's really interesting because it's that physical body impacting behaviour and psychological processes, and that I always find quite good and really fascinating. So that's the first part. Secondly, I think that there are parallels to this with dementia, because when my great uncle, when he had dementia, well, Alzheimer's to be more specific, and he was still physically there, he was still our great uncle, but he wasn't there. The actual person wasn't there. And that was a big grief. And in fact, most of the deaths in my family, as tragic as this is, I've always long drawn out processes where the person themselves dies a long time ago, but their physical body is still there and suffering. And that's really upsetting. And that's quite distressing for all of us because it feels so wrong. Like the person, like it would be easier slightly if we didn't have to watch them die. But we sort of have to, even though the person, our loved one, the person we cherish more than anything in the world, is long gone. So I think that there are definitely some parallels. So I'm definitely able to emphasize with what's going on here, because this is awful. Because the last thing is this has parallels with journaling, writing intervention designed to help family members of those with acquired brain injuries understand and manage their grief. This is basically journaling in essence, and I think journaling is really important. Like these clinical psychology reflection books that today's episode comes from is really about me processing my grief, my feelings about my rape in like this case, and I think that was going on in my life and how I can learn from it as an aspiring clinical psychologist. So, and it really did help me. It really did help me heal. So it was definitely useful. And when I'm feeling down and when my mental health flares up, even like nowadays, I still would like to journal, process how I'm thinking, and making sure that I give myself the time that I deserve by being passionate and just sitting down, taking a few moments and really processing what I'm feeling just so it doesn't build up. So, lots of good food for thought there. The next one is facial mimicry happens when we disagree too. In face to face conversations, people often start to copy each other's facial expressions. When this happens, they also tend to report liking the other person more and finding the conversation more enjoyable. Note the authors of a new paper in Emotion. As a result, it's been suggested that a positive social interaction is required for facial mimicry to take place. Previous studies on this have tended to be in the lab, however, and focused on situations in which people are agreeing. But at the Wigman Institute of Science and their colleagues therefore set out to explore whether facial mimicry might also happen during disagreements in the real world. So, personally, I found this one a bit of a surprise. I think that's more just because of autism and how we just don't tend to mimic people's facial expressions. I do to some extent, because you just learn after a while that it's something that people do. But it's just something to think about. Think about this. And my autism's really hampered me in giving any sort of like constructive thought when it comes to this one. But something I would find quite interesting, and it's just sort of linked to autism. If we know the finding that if we smile, if we show positive interactions, and if we try and get someone to mimic our positive facial expressions, can we influence their reactions to become more positive, especially in a disagreement? Of course, you've got to be subtle because you're having a proper disagreement and you're smiling and you're trying to show positivity in this disagreement, and that's just going to annoy the other person more. But I think there are some lessons here, or at least some things to consider. So yeah, that is actually quite interesting, and that's all I can say on that one. So the last one is whose work performances influence pay requests? Knowing the amount your co-workers make is increasingly common. In 2023, the EU issued a directive to encourage organisations to include salary ranges in job postings. While some companies have voluntarily opted to start sharing such information, websites like Glassdoor, where current or former employees can anonymously share details about a workplace, have also increased the amount of information shared about company pay. Many argue this kind of transparency reduces inequality. According to a new study in the Journal of Business Ethics, however, there might be some unintended consequences to the practice. There, a team led by Boris Makasky finds that feelings of entitlement or demoralization around pay can emerge based on how close to the top or bottom of the workplace hierarchy someone is. Okay, okay, so I think that this one does have some good implications, or at least some interesting ones from my perspective. Because recently, because I'm almost done with my outreach work at my university, I've actually been thinking about this, like how far I've come, how far I've grown, how good I am at my job, and how valued I am. Which, to be honest, after working somewhere for 6 years, you are sort of expected to, and I can see quite stark differences between me after doing this job for 6 years and someone who's just brand new. Like, I didn't realize that I've actually grown that much and I've learned so much compared to new people, which I guess is just common sense, but still. And I know it's a lot more common, like to talk about pay though. Like us student ambassadors, even though technically we all work for the same organisation, and we're all technically on different bands because of additional roles that we have though. Like we're all very open about it, and I'm always very open about the money that I make. Even though my mum technically isn't impressed at times because I'm on more money than her per hour, but she works full time, so in the long term, she actually makes a lot more money than me. So, feelings of entitlement and demoralization around pay. And I guess to some extent, I do feel this myself, and the reason why I'm admitting this is because I'm not perfect. I'm a human being, and I have all the flaws that come with that, though. But when I'm doing what's known as band D work, which is £22 an hour, I do feel slightly entitled to that at times because it's brilliant money. I love it, and to be honest, it does put me above quite a lot of people. People though, but again though, I'm flawed. Like I'm a human being at the end of the day, so I do get that. And demoralization, I think if you're really close to the bottom, and then you hear that people that are higher than you, especially if you feel that you're working harder than them and you deserve more money, to be honest, you are going to fall down because why should you be on lesser money than those people who don't work as hard? That's something that I do find quite relatable, to be honest. So, just some interesting food for thought this week. And maybe that's something that we should all reflect on. Maybe we should all think about when it comes to our own jobs. Do we feel entitled or demoralized when we compare our wages to other people? So, I hope you enjoy the psychology news section. So, let's move on to the personal update. So we're moving on to the personal update. This week has been a lot of fun. Definitely busy. Busy because I've been continuing to chip away at my dissertation. Thankfully, I only have 3 more comments to improve. So I'm hoping before I go to board games with some friends, to be able just to finish my dissertation draft, send it to my supervisor, and just hope beyond hope. I do not have to do anywhere near as much. This time round again, when she sent me back her comments on my second draft. And I definitely made you definitely learn so much more from your mistakes because I basically had to redo my qualitative discussion section because no, my qualitative result section because her comments basically were this is such a weird way to actually do it because I did it by questions, not by themes. To be honest, it was done by themes. It was just done by questions. At least that's what it looks like. So that was quite a disaster, to be honest. And I basically had to redo all of it. All of it, though. And I had to learn a lot more about thematic analysis, about the narrative. Oh, what is it? The narrative analysis or something like that. Certainly learned a lot more about thematic analysis, definitely how to write up a qualitative results section, and it was just it was really useful. Definitely a lot more work than I thought it was gonna do. Also, because I've done quite a lot of like variables for the quantitative sections, my my correlation table took so much time. My correlation table took like an hour to produce to produce, mainly because I've not really done one before. Yes, I don't think I have. No, I've not done one before. Even though, well, maybe back in my undergrad's stats coursework, but I didn't have many variables back then, at least compared to the ones I had now. So lots of really good stuff. Definitely concerned about word count because I'm pretty sure I don't have as many words left as I would like, especially because I've still got to do the discussion and the conclusion. Well, I've just got to relook at them and then approve them. Yeah, my supervisor is not allowed to help me with that regard. So a lot of university stuff. So in terms of like fun stuff, outreach was brilliant this week. Not only because I was doing some outreach tutoring on a like housing challenge for the first time, which was a brilliant workshop. For basically year 8 students, so 12 or 13-year olds, they come to the university and they have to create their own university accommodation, like models, presentations and stuff. And some students recommended university students live in tree houses. Yes, 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 yes. I would love that. I would love to live in a tree house. That is basically the way how they described it. I don't know if any of you have seen Star Wars: Return of the Jedi and Endor and the little Ewoks. All live in their tree houses, which are linked together by wooden platforms. That was basically the vibe they were going for. I support it. I agree with that wholeheartedly. So I'm really glad that that team won. And then on the Thursday, I was given some assembly talks that were about what is university. Actually, to very similar age groups. It's like, what is university? What can you study at university? Where do you live? Some finance stuff and a whole bunch of other questions. And it was a lot of fun, mainly because the school gave me a laser pointer. I didn't realise how much I'd missed playing around with a laser pointer and almost being semi-unprofessional. Laser pointers are just amazing. And they had a massive stage, so I could perch myself like a cat for quite a while. It was a lot of fun. I've had a brilliant week, and it really does remind me just to enjoy the small things in life. And as always, I always love to hear your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. So you can always email me, connorwhiteley@connorwhiteley.net. You can always leave a comment down in the show notes at connorwhiteley.net/podcast. And you can always tweet on Twitter at sci-fi Wiley, leave a comment on the Facebook post or LinkedIn post. And as always feel free to send pictures of where you're listening in from. I always love to see where all of you are listening from all over the world. And I always love to hear from all of you because it really helps make the podcast feel more like a conversation. So today's episode has been sponsored by Clinical Psychology Reflections, Volume 6, Thoughts on Mental Health psychotherapy, and abnormal psychology. So this is a brilliant sponsor for today's episode. This is a brand new book. It was meant to come out in May, but it's basically the end of June, and this week is going to be the start of July. So it's been quite delayed for a few different reasons. But I love this book because this has to be one of the most thoughtful, most insightful, and actually quite thought-provoking clinical psychology reflective books that I've actually done to date, because we look at some amazing topics like the Lansdowne model, which is this amazing psychological model in Cornwall, England. I really want it to be rolled out nationally because in the UK, whenever you want to go to mental health support and get a referral, you have to go to a medical doctor. Then you have to get referred, which isn't easy. Then you need to wait a few months to actually be referred to that service. Then you're put on a waiting list, etc. But the Langston model allows you to see a clinical psychologist straight away if you just book a doctor's appointment. That's revolutionary. There's no waiting list. There's no referrals made to psychology teams unless it's more serious or it's more specialist work that's needed. That's amazing. Also in this book, we talk about how brilliant it is when psychology services have evening appointments. Oh, that is just brilliant. We also talk about the impacts of sexual violence. We talk about disempowerment in mental health. We talk about so many brilliant, fascinating topics that I flat out love. And this book was so much fun to write, even though I was dealing with so much agony, so much hell at the time of writing most of these reflections. It's all so insightful, so much fun, and I can't wait to share this with all of you. So that's Clinical Psychology Reflections, Volume 6. Available for all major ebook retailers, and you can order the paperback and a hardback version from Amazon, your local bookstore or local library if you request it. And if you want the audiobook narrated by artificial intelligence, then now you can, at selected audiobook retailers like Spotify, Kobo, Google Play, and Barnes & Noble, and selected library systems like Overdrive, Biblioteca, and Baker & Taylor. So whilst buying books helps to support the creation and the editing of the podcast, my time is sponsored by my wonderful patrons. And as always, a massive thank you to my wonderful patrons. Your support shows that you like the show and you want it to continue. And if you want to become a patron of the show and get access to tons of great rewards, now you can, including egg-exclusive access to over 60 egg-exclusive blog posts, which will be made into podcast episodes for weeks, months, or even years, and there are a whole bunch of other rewards too. So if you want to become a patron of the show, then please head on over to patreon.com/The Psychology World Podcast. Or if you want to support the podcast on a one-off basis, then now you can by heading over to buymeacoffee.com/Connor Whiteley. So that's enough of the personal update. Let's move on to the content part of today's episode. So we're moving on to the content part of today's episode. So we're going to be talking about what happens during a counselling assessment. And now that I've had my little cool down break, because I'm having to record this on a slightly hot morning, because I was too emotionally exhausted last night to do it when it was cool and sensible, let's dive into it. What happens during a counselling assessment? And as a reminder, this is an extract from my brand new book. In the last reflection, I told you, rather passionately, why I love evening appointments in mental health services. And in this reflection, I want to talk about what actually happens in a counselling assessment. I wanted to do this because I've had two now, and they're very similar, and these are very standard within mental health services. Therefore, in case you ever have to do one, or just to give you a bit more knowledge, I wanted to explain how counselling and assessments work. Of course, every mental health service will have slight differences, but this is for information purposes only, based on my experience as a client and a clinical psychology master's student at the time of writing. What happens during a counselling assessment? A counselling assessment for sexual assault counselling was done over Zoom at 7:30 at night. Again, it was very suitable and a great time for me. And I always have a problem getting onto Zoom, but I managed it somehow. As I mentioned in a few reflections ago, being a well-rounded person is critical in clinical psychology, because the lovely lady who was doing my assessment told me something. She told me about her dogs and that she was working from home, and a takeaway person was going to ring the doorbell at some point during our call for the other people in the house. This wasn't her being unprofessional, it was her making it clear that her dogs would probably bark and she didn't want to alarm me. And honestly, I found this sort of short conversation very reassuring, because it showed me that she was a kind, normal person, and she was the person who I could get along with, as well as it showed me that even though I had only literally just said hello, that she already had my best interests at heart. I appreciate that fact a lot, considering how nervous I had been about this counselling assessment. Next, she explained how the counselling assessment was going to work and how long it would last. She asked me some questions about myself, for example, what doctors am I registered at, am I living in the country, and just some more information about me. Afterwards, we spoke about the counselling itself. This included information on what I was hoping to gain out of this counselling, my physiological and psychological symptoms, and what my availability was. Now, as a client, it shows the power of being a well-rounded person and likable clinical psychologist, since in my last counselling assessment for the university, when the woman doing it was just answering me questions, I would give her the answers, but I wouldn't add any context or additional information. I didn't want to do this because I didn't like her. She was way too smiley, she interrupted, and I didn't have a natural rapport with her. However, the lovely lady at the charity I was open with, so I told her about the physiological symptoms, me being suicidal the other week, and I gave her more context than I normally would. I appreciated this, and as an aspiring clinical psychologist, I think this goes to show how important it is just to be friendly, respectful, and open with the client. I'm trying to build that therapeutic alliance or interpersonal skills as soon as possible, especially because the lady was able to add in information to my assessment forms that would help the counsellor in the future. I think one of the extra notes was something in the next section about have I ever thought that being dead would be easier. Now, she asked on a liking scale that I'll talk about in a moment, and it was only for 1 day, so on the scale it wouldn't have been a lot. But because I was honest and open with her, she was able to add the note that would be useful for my future counsellor. Furthermore, in this section, the woman asked me about my past mental health, am I on any medication, and those sort of general mental health questions. And I'm not on any medication, but I do have past mental health experience and past trauma, leading to an interesting question about why, if I ever requested my notes, I would see not for a placement counsellor written on them, since the charity has a handful of placement counsellors who want experience with sexual violence survivors, but the charity doesn't allow these placement counsellors to help survivors with additional trauma. This might sound harsh, but I seriously understand it. Due to I'm only speaking for myself here, but my child abuse and trauma directly impacted my sexual assault. And to be honest, if I wasn't abused as a kid, then I wouldn't have been sexually assaulted. So they're connected in that way. Yet, they were connected through the mental health impact after the sexual assault too. For example, the same sort of abusive and negative thoughts that popped up in my childhood popped up after my sexual assault. My mind tried to use my sexual assault as proof that everything that my abusers had taught me in a childhood was true, and so on. There was a massive connection and overlap, and as a client, I would prefer a fully qualified counsellor with a lot of experience to help me. Even as an aspiring clinical psychologist, I seriously wouldn't want someone like me here as my first few cases. Moving on to the final section of the counselling assessment, this section was reserved for the mental health questionnaires. Now, as psychology is a science, I am no stranger to questionnaires, and I've made some questionnaires myself. However, even I have to admit, mental health questionnaires are almost funny at times. They are so coded and calculating, and they miss so much nuance. Although my counselling assessment was a little messed up in this section, because this week had been extremely weird in terms of my mental health. I wasn't dealing with rape or sexual assault stuff this week because I was spending so much more time being publicly and privately attacked by someone I know who has dissociative identity disorder with psychotic features. Although I will admit that as soon as all of that was dealt with, the sexual violence stuff returned with a vengeance. Unfortunately, this was after the assessment was done. Anyway, there were 34 questions in a total, and some of them she didn't ask because I'd already answered them in the other sections in response to the other questions, as well as these were done from a Likert scale, from none of the time to most of the time, with often and some of the time, and occasionally being in the middle. In addition, the actual questionnaire had a time frame of the past 7 days, but because of the weirdness of my week, the lady proposed the past 7 to 10 days, which I wasn't going to reject. I needed the counselling way too much to not help myself. For the rest of the counselling assessment, we went through the questions that asked how happiness, social functioning, suicidality, anxiety, and a bunch of other domains of functioning too. It was a good set of questions, I admit, and the lady did something I appreciated. She kept it fun. She didn't make it seem like a deep, depressing task that would ultimately decide my future, and if I didn't answer something right, it would be the end of the world. No, instead, she kept it light and fun. She worked with me as well. Well, let's face it, in my mind, there was very little difference between often and some of the time. So sometimes me and her needed to think about certain answers, because the real answer was between those 2 points, but I needed to put something as my official answer. And that ability and patience to work with me was important. I'm really grateful that she wanted to do that with me, because she easily could have made me feel uncomfortable and awkward, so I would say random answers to get it over and done with. Yet she didn't. She made me feel listened to, respected, and she actually did some empowerment stuff without me or her even realizing. Even now, she waited for me to give a response so I could make a real choice for the first time since my sexual assault. And that felt amazing. Now I'm realizing that I actually made a choice for myself. That feels incredible and wonderful. I know for a few precious minutes I don't feel like a weak, pathetic victim. And yes, I realise that self-perception is something I need to work on in counselling. Then we wrapped up with whether I had any questions for her. Now, the next steps, and she spoke that if I needed support or had a major breakdown, I could reach out to the helpline or the woman at the charity who referred me to the counselling department. She's my dedicated sexual violence worker. Personally, I still think I should have been given some sort of resource or brief psychological intervention, especially as the waiting list could be 3 months long, but the charity is brilliant. and I'm happy with my egg experience. On the whole, when it comes to counselling assessments, as an aspiring clinical psychologist, I've learned that you need to be kind, respectful, and patient with the client, since they will be nervous, they will be scared, and they will probably be feeling so disempowered about the world around them. Therefore, if you can give them a positive experience using your good interpersonal skills and make them feel respected, listened to, and cared about, then even though this is not a counselling session, you are going to have an insanely positive impact on them. I've had a good and bad counselling assessment, and after comparing the two in my head, I know the main difference is the person performing the assessment. You are the main factor that will impact the client's experience. Of course, the client has to want therapy, they have to want to change and improve their lives, and they have to work with the therapist. I know that. However, if you don't treat the client with respect, patience, and if you don't empower them, like the first woman at my university, then you might have a negative impact and a negative egg experience on them, and that is not what we want. It will happen at some point in your career. That's normal, and you can learn from that egg experience. But if you can nail it and make a client feel great and hopeful about the future, then you might have already helped the client more than you could ever realise, and it isn't even the first counselling session yet. I know it can happen from my own egg experience, so I have no doubt that it can happen again and again and again. So I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode and you got something out of it. I know that I did, because even though my mental health basically died after this counselling assessment was done, and I had a horrific few months during counselling, but definitely more beforehand, just in that gap, I would definitely say that this was a powerful, brilliant experience. I learned so much from, and it's transformed my life for the better. So a counselling assessment can be brilliant. If you know anyone who would enjoy today's episode, then please share it with them. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help spread the word about the podcast. And if you want to learn more about more brilliant clinical psychology reflections that will really help you get a deeper understanding of clinical psychology in the real world that goes beyond our lectures, then please check out Clinical Psychology Reflections Volume 6, also mental health, psychotherapy, and abnormal psychology, available in all the usual places, and the AI-generated audiobook is available at the normal places too. So please feel free to let me know your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. I always love to hear from all of you. And if you want to support the podcast on a monthly basis, then now you can. Patreon.com/The Psychology World Podcast. Or if you want to support the podcast on a one-off basis, then now you can. BuyMeACoffee.com/Connor Whiteley. So have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Found it helpful. Please remember to like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel and follow the podcast on your favourite podcast app. And if you wanted to learn more, then please check out the backlist of the podcast episodes or my books at conwhiteley.net. So have a great day and I'll see you next time.